At Sight and Scene, we feature the innovators, disruptors, and changemakers using reality capture technology to drive real impact. These are the people who saw a problem, challenged the status quo, and took action, whether restoring ecosystems, improving resilience, or transforming infrastructure.
They bring a deep sense of responsibility and stewardship to their work, leveraging technologies like drones, laser scanning, GIS, and mapping to create meaningful change. More than just experts, they're storytellers, sharing their journeys and the why behind their work. Our mission is to amplify their voices, educate, and inspire others to push boundaries and take action.
Sight and Scene.
If you're, capturing an oil and gas refinery, it's not unusual to capture 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 scans. And now they have a way where they can load that within a few seconds on their phone.
Welcome back to Sight and Scene, everybody. We are on episode, is this 11, Scott? Are we
so.
11 episodes in?
Wow.
Yeah, it's coming along swimmingly, and we're actually back in our virtual studio, back to back with an episode we recorded yesterday. So we're excited to bring that one to you, and we're also spacing these out every 2 weeks just to give us some time to make sure we put the proper cleaning up on the back end to have good content for everybody. So we're, again, similar to a couple episodes ago, probably not a ton of updates we have on our individual fronts. Scott, anything new from yesterday, or things we didn't hit on yesterday you want to make sure we touch on?
Nothing too crazy. It's definitely picking up work-wise here, though. I think it's amazing what happens in 24 hours. We just got a referral on some solid LiDAR work that I hope will undertake. Early days, I want say who it is, but it came from somebody that we're hiring to do some work, that I'm hiring to do some work for me. So it's great. It just shows like it's such a small world. Like I the amount of times I've done work with other drone companies, engineering firms, and then they've passed the buck back to me for something else is more than I expected going into this stuff. So yeah, that's a cool part. So I think collaboration is like probably going to be the theme, right? I think that's going to be a big part of what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And, something from my perspective, and because I'd always worked for another company throughout my career and never really, I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit, but when I finally did go out on my own over a year and a half ago, tapping into your network, you've heard that term, your network is your net worth, or your net worth is your network, however that you want to, six one half dozen the other. But I'd never really tapped into it out of necessity, or I guess engaged all that much to say on LinkedIn, for instance. But it is fascinating to me, now that I have my own business, like diving in and interacting with people and collaborating, and just that process of engaging in conversations and making connections and realizing how deep your network is when you've been in the industry for over 26 years. It's like, wow. And all these connections that you thought would never amount to anything, it's all of a sudden these two disparate connections that you had somehow connect together to form an opportunity. Yeah. And it is fascinating. There's got to be some sort of science to this that, well, LinkedIn's probably figured it out, right?
Yeah,
there's got to be some statistical information that correlates to this. It would just be from a data perspective, as somebody who, we deal with data all the time. I think it would be really interesting to see, the yields that this provides. And it's just fun. You get to connect with people you haven't talked to in a while. You did projects with 10, 15 years ago. And man, I'm really enjoying that aspect of it.
That's some of my favorite parts of it.
Yeah. And speaking of connections, we have a really exciting guest on today. And Arash is somebody that we've probably been talking for well over a year now, just because I am someone who uses their software. And it has just been an amazing experience, both from the software itself, but also the support I get, the collaboration I get with the use of that tool through Arash. So today we have Arash Keissami in the studio, and Arash is the co-founder of Nira. They're a tech company based in Irvine, California, and they're built on the belief that high-resolution 3D geospatial data should be readily accessible and presented with the highest visual quality. Before co-founding Nira, Arash developed a broad range of experiences across multiple industries, such as construction and engineering at Parsons, He's done video game development at Sony and software development at Autodesk. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who all those folks are, and particularly in the AEC space, Autodesk is the juggernaut. So, Arash, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you and Scott again. It's a pleasure for me to be on here.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. Well, I teed it up a little bit for you, but we'd love to hear more about where you're coming from and a little bit more of your background and how that ultimately led to Nira's inception and development.
Sure. So it's been quite a long road. I guess, where do I start? Let's start when I was a baby. No, just actually, I could probably start at maybe even at age 8. My parents owned a restaurant, and so I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. So they owned a restaurant, and at age 8, they didn't really want me to be working there, but there was a bunch of high school kids and other kids that were working there, so I kind of wanted to be around them. So I would just sweep the floors and do things along those lines, and periodically there would be some guys that would come in and they would ask for free food or free drinks or whatever, and I would offer it or provide it. And in one instance, there was someone that asked me, he's like, "Hey, is there anything that you want?" And we actually had a Radio Shack store nearby. And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And it was, and I said, "Well, I'm really looking to get a computer one of these days." Not really thinking what he was asking me for. He just asked me, like, "What do you think about?" Sure enough, a few minutes later, he walked in with the computer. It was something called I think it was TRS-80. I think it was around $600 at the time. It was it's kind of technically like a laptop, but it wasn't like a flip laptop. It was just kind of like a screen with a dot matrix screen. And he just literally just walked in. He's like, "Here you go." And I'm like, "Oh my God."
Wow.
And I'm like, well, okay. And it didn't have a manual. Just, pretty much I'm 99% sure it was stolen. So I, but I was as a kid, and I had to come up with a story as to how I got it. And I just told my parents the truth. I'm like, one of our, customers, quote unquote, came in and just gave it to me. And I, didn't have even a AC charger, no box, nothing. So I was just kind of left with it. The Radio Shack and the restaurant kind of shared a dumpster. And sure enough, there were books that they would throw away. And I ended up buying an AC adapter, and I ended up getting some of the books, and it didn't really come with any applications. It just came with, I think it just came with like BASIC, which was like the basic programming language.
It's like DOS, right?
Yeah, more or less. I don't even, I mean, it had, of course, an operating system, but I don't think it had actual built-in applications. I do remember like you had to type in your code. But more or less what I would do is I would take some of the books that I found or bought, and it would just basically be basic programming books, and just type them in, write the instructions, and then just run it and play with it. And they were just all very basic. I mean, I keep using the word basic, but it's no pun intended there, but they were all very basic applications, and anything from, a blackjack game to some other stuff. And of course, growing up in the 80s, in Chicago, the two things I cared about more than anything was video games and sports. Yeah. So I was hoping to try to make, like a sports game or anything like that. But again, it wasn't like a graphics machine in any capacity. So it grew old over time. And really, I just kind of was still in the back of my mind, knew I really wanted to eventually start to make games when the time was right for it. Again, in 80s graphics is very different than what you have in video games today. But right around the time I was graduating high school, which was 1995, the PlayStation was coming out, and that was the first real mainstream 3D graphics machine. And also some other things were happening. Toy Story, T2, Jurassic Park. These were very inspirational films for me. And I was like, okay, I'm very interested in video games, but I'm also very intrigued by 3D graphics in general. Yeah. And so I was trying to understand how those movies were made. And around the exact same time, maybe a year or two after the PlayStation was announced or released, Sony very uniquely released something called the Net Yaruze. I don't know if most people have heard about that or remember that.
Not familiar.
I think it's a Japanese term, but it was made available all throughout the world. And it was a Sony PlayStation development kit that you could buy. It was around $1,000.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think I've heard of that. I've heard of that, and like people using that. Yep.
Yeah. So it was unique in the color. It was black. So it had you could still play PlayStation games on it, but you connected it to a PC through a serial cable. And basically you would write code on your PC and then just download it to your PlayStation, and basically had an opportunity to make a PlayStation game.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm all in on that. So I right away bought that. I was probably one of the first people to buy it. I think it came out around 96 or 97. So just a year or two after the PlayStation. And this was my first opportunity to try to make a game. I didn't even have a computer. And so that was I first bought the PlayStation Net Urize. And then I ended up trying to figure out what to do for buying a computer, because I didn't have a lot of experience with computers aside from that Tandy laptop that I had. So my close neighbor, he was a few years younger than me, but he was kind of like the computer kid. We played sports together and all that stuff. And he was, again, a couple years younger than me, but he knew a lot more about computers than I did. So I just asked him, like, what do you recommend? What should we get? Or what should I get? And so I ended up, just getting a job, trying to basically ended up getting a job like at Toys R Us to save up to buy a decent computer.
At Toys R Us?
Yeah.
They were selling computers at
No,
Toys
they
R Us?
weren't. They weren't selling a computer. I worked there just to save up money to buy a computer.
Got it. Okay.
But it's, computers were, several $1,000s. So it took several months to get.
Sure.
And in the time, I would literally just walk with my PlayStation Net Urize to my friend's house, and we would just connect it to his machine and just kind of figure out how to use it and learn how to make games together, which quite frankly was a lot more fun than trying to do it myself anyway.
Yeah.
And it saved me several $1,000s from having to buy a computer at the same time. Exactly. And in the summers, we were especially productive because neither one of us had to go to school or any of that stuff. And it wouldn't be unusual for me to walk home like at 4 a.m. from just programming with him all night.
Wow.
Things have gotten a lot better back than they are now, but like we specifically wanted to get a graphics card that had like an SVGA cable that you could connect to a TV so that he could be working on his computer and we could also have it on a big screen so that I could view it from like his couch or whatever, and we could kind of share a computer together and learn together at the same time.
So familiar.
Yeah. And there was times, I think there was one time I was walking home. It was a neighborhood, it was like a block away, so it wasn't like direct neighbors. And I would walk home at like 4 a.m. A cop stopped me. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I had like this PlayStation in my hand. And I'm like, "I'm just walking home." He's like, "What are you doing with that?" I'm just like, "Oh, I promise you, I'm not like robbing someone." But it felt like that to him. So he literally followed me home to make sure I was going home and found out where I was living. But that was kind of like our summers, and it eventually got to the point where the Urize provided some suggestions on what software to use for creating 3D graphics. So the one thing, and the interesting thing about the Net Urize is that the net part was related to the fact that it was connected to the net, which means that you were connected to other Net Urize developers. So you got to see what games they had, you got to download them. But we didn't get, I would say, super far with programming before we needed to start creating our own content. And I didn't know much about that at all. And it was just one of those things where 3D graphics was still very primitive, but it was still very new to me. And I grew up playing mostly 2D games, and understanding 2D graphics and developing anything in 3D was just beyond my understanding. And so I ended up looking into the various 3D applications at the time. And there were quite a few. Most of them were very expensive. The most prolific and popular one, the one that more or less all the film studios were using, was something called Softimage. And that was, it was developed, I think, in Canada, but it was acquired by Microsoft, and their big thing was to get it on Windows NT, which was the professional operating system at the time. And the problem with Softimage, it was $13,000, but they did have student licenses at the time. But you had to live in California to be eligible. I think not only you have to live in California, but you have to also attend one of the California schools to make yourself eligible to buy that license. So that's strange. Unless I was able to move to California, which I was still quite young, it wasn't something I was going to be able to get access to. And then there were a few other ones. And there was a company that was somewhat associated with Autodesk. I don't know if they were officially part of Autodesk, but it was called Kinetics. And they made something called 3D Studio. And they had announced that they were going to be releasing a new version called 3D Studio Max. It's now typically referred to as 3ds Max.
Yes.
And I was like first in line to get that. So if they had a student license of that, you didn't have any restrictions of where you're going to live. So I bought the student license. It was around $1,500. And I got it with one of the popular plugins at the time, and I installed it, and I was like, oh my God, this is unlike anything else I've ever used. And both myself and my neighbor, and by the way, my neighbor's name was Andrew. He's actually a co-founder of Nira. So
Oh,
we've
no
been
way.
working together for,
think
I
I
want to
was
say,
emailing him too. So I love to hear that. That is,
oh yes,
yeah.
yes. We essentially became best friends. We pretty much did
Awesome.
everything together. We did split for a little bit just because I was a little bit older than he was, and so I ended up getting work a little bit earlier, and that moved me around the country. But we
Yeah.
stayed in touch more or less every day.
Awesome.
And we
That's
kept,
so great.
yeah. So and like we've been more or less doing everything together. And even in that time, while I was, when I started to diverge a little bit away from the programming side and started to get into the graphic side, we kind of did that together as well.
Mhm.
And so we were learning now 3D Studio Max and trying to get to understand that application as much as possible. We probably went overboard with that. Like, we just needed to get to understand it well enough where we could start dumping in some graphics into whatever game we were going to be making for the PlayStation. But I was enthralled by it. I was like, I couldn't even believe something like that was even possible. And because it was so brand new, it felt like there was an opportunity to become kind of like an expert in something, where with programming, I knew it was going to be like a 10-year run before I would feel like I had any legitimacy in or level of understanding. It seemed like there was a lot in front of me.
Yeah. So what year is this now?
So this is,
like
I want
early
to say, around
2000s?
96, 97.
97.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
probably around 97 or so.
Mhm.
I should probably look up whatever I can to find out the exact dates, but I want to say right around 97 or so.
Yeah.
And then around the same time, the internet isn't, of course, anything like it is now. So there wasn't a lot of tutorials. There were certainly some things that are on the internet, but a lot of times I would just go to the bookstore. There were still some books. Of course, we had the manuals. But I went through every page, and I pretty much mastered 3ds Max, and I learned that thing front to back. There was not a single button that I didn't know. Now, granted, it's 1,000 times more complicated than it was back then. Like
Yeah.
now, if I look at version 1, it's like a toy compared to what you can do with it.
Yeah.
But it was still sophisticated enough where there were a lot of people, and especially in my area, that needed assistance with how to learn it. And eventually, there was a user groups that spawned in the Chicagoland area, and basically a bunch of professionals from a wide variety of industries would come to the user group. So 3ds Max is different than Softimage. Softimage was almost exclusively used in the entertainment space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to make movies and games and stuff like that, specifically most of the movies. Where with 3ds Max, it was very prevalent in the architectural space and or design and stuff like that. And so when I was attending these user groups, there would be people doing everything from architectural visualizations to exhibit designs and
Mhm.
everything in between. So not something that I was super interested in, but it was fellow 3ds studio people. And at this point, Andy kind of went back to just maybe a little bit of programming, and also went into kind of playing video games for a bit. And I was more or less on my own, just trying to learn 3D Studio Max as much as I possibly could.
Mhm.
But like I said, I felt like I was quite confident in what I knew. And so more often than not with these user groups, I was kind of answering everyone's questions, or actually providing demos and just showcasing all the things that it could do. And this is late 90s, or kind of mid to late 90s, and a lot was happening.
Yeah.
Just like we live in the world with AI where everything's changing every day. Like I
Yeah.
felt like at that time, new plugins were coming out, new technologies. Every version
Yeah.
was like a monumental leap from the next. And so when you went from version 1 to 2 to 2.5 and everything in between, there was so much to learn. And I loved teaching. And so it gave me a great opportunity to kind of force myself to learn it and keep up with it. And with that, from the user groups, I just started to get a lot of job opportunities. Everything from consulting to, and I'm, just fresh out of high school. Like I did go to school, to college for a little bit, but this was an opportunity where I more or less felt like I needed to drop out of college and just focus on basically working and making money from that. Like one of my first when I was working at Toys R Us, I would make like $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
One of my first paychecks for consulting, I was making like $15,000 a week.
Oh my gosh.
So it was significant.
Little jump.
Yeah, it was a huge jump. And I remember when I wanted to quit school, my parents like, you can't quit school. What are you going to do? I'm like, well, just give me some time. Let me learn the software, and then let me see. And like one of my first significant paychecks, I remember I showed my dad. He was like blown away. He was like, oh my God, how is that possible? That's like drug dealer money. What are you doing?
Yeah.
So
pay with college for that later when you make that much. Like,
exactly.
Like,
so it was great. It was a great time to kind of be kind of what I would consider a pioneer in that space, and I was jumping from company to company, doing everything from creating computer graphics for, arcades to construction to anything in between, exhibit design. And eventually I was consulting for a construction company, and I was there for several months, and they were paying me quite a bit. And I think they were like, hey, listen, like, we're paying you quite a bit. We'd like to just have you on full time. But I was already making more than they were paying,
Right.
my boss's boss. And so I'm like, I kind of prefer the way things are now. But then they're like, you know what? Well, we have all these really interesting projects coming up, and we have this thing where we want to create this real-time simulator, and we'd like for you to kind of be in charge of it. And it was like a $500,000 machine. It was like, at the time there was Silicon Graphics, and they had like the highest end stuff. And the machine was $500,000. The software it was called Vega. I forgot the name of the company that made it, but it was, I think it was Intergraph. It might be some company. I have to look them up, but the software, it was kind of like Unreal before Unreal, where it was basically a real-time engine. It worked specifically on this extremely expensive Silicon Graphics hardware. And they're like, we want you to kind of build this virtual prototype of a project we have in New York.
So is this like early inceptions of BIM kind of stuff? Is that what you're...
Well, the idea was they were trying to build a tunnel from one of the boroughs, I can't remember which one, in New York to Grand Central Terminal underground. And they were, it's a big $5 billion project, and they wanted to visualize it. So they wanted to basically recreate a portion of Manhattan in 3D and have it all in real time and simulate crowds and all the other kind of stuff that comes with it. And I was like, this is awesome. This is basically me making a video game.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm all in. Let's do it. And so they ended up sending me to New York, and they're like, let's just capture it. So they sent me with a camera. It was actually a DV video camera.
Sure. I remember
so
those.
It was like this big Canon DV camera. It didn't have to be that big, but they gave me the bigger one. And then at that time, even digital cameras were brand new. I think I had one of the simplest Nikon. I think it was like 640 by 480 resolution Nikon camera, and I basically just captured probably like an 8-block area of Manhattan, all around Grand Central Terminal. I was supposed to be there for like, I don't know, a couple weeks. I ended up staying there for like 2 months. They basically just gave me the company credit card, and I ended up just basically walking around.
Awesome.
It's kind of crazy how many celebrities I met along the route. Like, they're not like huge names, but I'm like, oh my God, I know that person.
Yeah. And you got it on tape now.
I have them on tape. Believe it or not, I do. It's like, I literally walk past them and like, oh my God, did I just pass, whoever? And so, finally, I ended up, recording or capturing a big part of Grand Central Terminal. Like, I would just go through every little facet of that place. I was going through the tunnels. I probably didn't have clearance to doing any of this stuff, but I would just.
Well, this was the 90s, right?
Like, I know. Pre
9/11.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. Like, there's no way I would have been able to get access. Like, I was getting on the roof of Grand Central Terminal. Like, there was just ways. I was finding my way all around the things. And
I realized I kept a dream here.
Exactly. Now then, when I finally got back to the office and was like, all right, now I've got thousands of photos, hours of videos. Now what am I going to do? And I had to try to replicate or recreate a lot of this, basically do photogrammetry before photogrammetry, or what I thought was before photogrammetry. We ended up buying a software from a company called RealViz. They made a photogrammetry tool. I think it was called Image Modeler or Photo Modeler or something like that. It was like $10,000, very expensive. We actually bought the suite of software. They sold 4 different applications. One was called Retimer. It like did slow motion stuff. It was all very sophisticated, really cool stuff. And it was the first photogrammetry tool, which brings me kind of full circle to where I'm at now. But it's also like the very first one, but it was very archaic. Everything was manual. It wasn't like a thing where you dump a bunch of photos and it creates a nice 3D model. You had to basically create every manual type point. I think the tutorial was, it gave you like a set of photos of like a mailbox, and I think it took like a day just to create a simple like 100 polygon mailbox. It took forever.
Well, as exciting as it was, like, did you find moments where you're just in the trenches of this really tedious type of stuff? You're like, oh, this, like, you ever have second thought? Maybe not second thoughts as far as the bigger picture, but just, is this the right path, or is this the right tool, or just, this is so tedious? Because sometimes when I'm engaged in something that I'm just super enthralled with, there's always a component of it that's like it just is a drag, you know.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember the parts where I don't enjoy. I try to forget those, but I always
Yeah.
feel like I enjoyed almost every aspect of it, just because I felt like, how else am I going to get access to this kind of stuff? You know,
Right.
I'm not going to be able to get, I'm never going to be able to afford a 10,000 piece of software or a $500,000 silicon graphics machine or any of that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I was very eager. Now, granted, they never actually fulfilled that promise of getting this silicon graphics machine.
Yeah.
And they never ended up getting the Vega software either.
Mm.
Or they were kind of dragging their feet on it. I think they were having budgeting issues, which makes sense. You know, like it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And
I don't know any construction projects that go over budget. Like
never
happen.
exactly. But it's really one of those things where things were taking a while, and it was the promise was they would have it, and a year and a half went by, and we didn't get it yet. And at this point, I still had my dream of getting into the video game industry. And I wanted to, and I was always very intrigued about real-time graphics and doing stuff with real-time graphics. And again, I was relegated to just doing things within 3ds Max and rendering or doing just basically, video renderings and not as much in the real-time space. So I ended up basically paying my way to go to a game developers conference in California. And in my time there was several classes that dealt with 3ds Max and some of the other tools that a lot of studios or a lot of gaming studios use. 3ds Max is one of the unique applications where it was kind of very pervasive. It was more or less the prominent tool for a lot of different markets, and especially in games. And so I attended some of the classes, sort of same things that happen in the user groups where people would ask questions periodically, and those that were doing the actual talk didn't have the answer to some of them. I'm like, oh, you have to do it this way or that way. And just without showing a portfolio, without showing anything, I was just getting a significant amount of job offers right there from the show floor. And I didn't take them super seriously. And at this point, I was already at Parsons for about a year and a half, and I was kind of comfortable. So I'm like, and they're like, yeah, just get in touch with us, and we'd like to, we'll have you show us your portfolio and everything else you do. I didn't really consider myself like an artist, even though 3ds Max is an artist tool. I was more like a technician. That was taking in either CAD data or trying to create photogrammetry models or whatever I could do from a technical standpoint, which you can do a lot with 3ds Max from that perspective, especially if you know a lot of the different tools. And I was also developing tools themselves, like scripts and extending the software itself, which brought a lot of value there. But one company in particular, so I got like a job offer from like Disney and some other ones at GDC. The conference, by the way, was called GDC. It's still a very popular conference for game development.
It's a great one.
Yeah. So I ended up going, and then finally Sony kind of insisted on me working there. They had an office in San Diego. I was living in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. I didn't really want to leave. I kind of was close to my family. I was like, I'm not ready to leave. And finally, they're like, we got an office in St. Louis. Do you want to try that? And I was like, St. Louis is not bad. So I literally flew there for my first day of work. I basically said, can I just see what it's like? And like, yeah, go there. Let's spend like a week, see what it's like. I basically told Parsons, I'm going to take a week off to see what I want to kind of experiment with something else. And they basically said, sure. And then I basically went to Sony, didn't even have a place to stay. They actually just had a place for me at Sony. And then I ended up staying there for a week. I'm like, this is interesting. They were working on a really cool game. They built a studio specifically because of like one hotshot programmer that was there. And they're like, hey, we got this really cool programmer. We're working on this first-person shooter game, and which was kind of aligned with the type of games that I liked. And we'd like for you to work there. It was still very early, super small studio. There wasn't even a lot of people there. And they wanted me to kind of head a lot of the different things that were going on there, specifically like building the tools and also basically being like an expert for the software itself, which 3ds Max was still kind of young, where it was hard to find people that knew it in and out.
Right.
So I was like, sure. Ended up going there for a week, went back to Chicago, flew back to Chicago. And then I basically ended up quitting Parsons and then went back to Sony. Again, this was in St. Louis. We ended up finishing the game. And then at that point, it was a very chaotic studio. There's a million stories that I could tell you about all the stuff that's happened there. I mean, absolutely chaotic. It was just
in a good way. Like chaos in a good way sometimes is such an exciting environment.
Yeah, honestly, I would have never imagined it, but I really missed leaving St. Louis. Like when the time comes, I always thought of that as like a stopgap. I was like, all right, I'm just going to stay here and then eventually go back to Chicago or wherever the world takes me. I didn't expect I would want to stay or live in St. Louis, but it ended up being sad to leave. I actually grew It was just a bunch of guys. I should say we had some female employees, but there was mostly a bunch of guys who would hang out more or less all day, every day and it, the typical crunch of video games. There were plenty of circumstances where we were there from 9 to 9. And I grew some very lifelong friends that I still keep in touch with, even though we've kind of disbanded for the last 10 years.
Yeah. The grass is green where you water it. I always like to say it's like, it's the place, it's the people. It could be anywhere, but when you have those bonds with people, it's fantastic.
Can I ask, did that game ever see the light of day?
Oh yeah. So that game was I wonder if you remember it, because
this is my peak video game playing time.
Okay,
so good. I'm wondering what you worked on.
So it was at a time where MMOs started to become popular. So
was it PlanetSide?
It was PlanetSide.
No way, man.
Yes.
Oh my God.
First of all, did you play it?
Not only did I play the heck out of that, it was the reason my best friend got his. This is coming so full circle, man. You're gonna love this. It was the reason my best friend got his Monster Dell XPS system. With my friend, I founded Harkin and stuff, and the same thing. Like, I've been with my buddy Tyler ever since, and we would crowd around that game, and that kicked off pretty much like our interest in 3D and all of that. That game deserves so much more, man. Like,
thank you.
Like that. I mean, they've made sequels, but that one was absolutely revolutionary. I could give you a bunch of people who know that. Now I'm talking to one of my heroes here, man. I knew I already was.
Nice here. Thank you.
Is so cool.
Yes.
So you made PlanetSide, which for all our listeners is like one of the best most ambitious MMO games ever made. It's
a small miracle that it made the light of day. There were so many times where certainly myself and probably many others were convinced that it was not going to happen. And just to kind of preface it, it was a first-person shooter, a lot like Fortnite, in that you're kind of confined to an island. And at the time, I think we were trying to get up to 100 people playing on a single map, and it was and again, it was quite ambitious. And that was partially why I wanted to do it. I was like, this is very unique. Like, it wasn't even they could have put me in any place on the planet, and I would have been more than happy to try to work on that game.
So I'm not a huge gamer, so I'm aware of these things. I have a teenage son too, so it's like, I'm definitely aware of Fortnite. But was this one of the first games that was kind of the open landscape? I know it has a specific name to it. Like, what is that?
And a shooter called? like I'm sure everyone knows Halo, and it was right when Halo was just getting cooked up too, so it's very popular. But you're playing Halo with, hundreds of people. That was the idea. There was so many people on one server that it felt like you were doing all out battle. Pretty much, and that was such a big. Was 2003 that came out, right?
Yeah.
So,
that was like when bandwidths were. You might get like 3 megabytes.
This was when we were just asking a user to move from dial-up, pretty much. If I recall.
Okay.
Internet. Even at that time, at a big company like Sony. Again, we had a smaller office. Like, we had poor internet. Like, we had I think the entire office had less than I want to say less than half a megabyte per second. It was tiny. So so when we had to transfer data from California or anywhere else, they ended up spending. I remember they ended up getting a T1 line or something like that. It was like $20,000 a month for just reasonable internet. And at the T1, I want to say it was like a megabit per second or something. It was not even that great. But yeah, anyway, we all grinded. It was not easy. There was a lot of stress, a lot of chaos, and there was plenty of times where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, and I wanted to leave. But we got through it. We finished the game, and then I don't remember the specifics as to why, but they ended up just disbanding that office. I think it was just so chaotic for so many different reasons, and they had an office in Austin and an office in San Diego. The main headquarters was in San Diego, and they asked for a few of us to move to either Austin or San Diego, and I ended up choosing San Diego. And so that's where I ended up staying for, I want to say, a few more years. And then I ended up working on a variety of other games, EverQuest and a few PlayStation games and stuff like that. And then eventually I kind of started to realize, like, I'm starting to now animate and do all kinds of other things. It was in the art realm. And I actually asked to be able to do a lot of different things just because I'm always kind of curious how things work. But I never felt like I was really super passionate about it. And when I was working on a game called EverQuest, which is kind of like a fantasy game, you're now starting to animate tails and wings and fingers and everything else in between. I'm like, man, this is not me. Like, this is, and another aspect to all this is that there was technology that was becoming available that was kind of like the precursor for AI, and that was doing things where it was more automated. And I just felt like I needed to get back into learning how to make tools.
Right.
So there was a
right.
company called, I think it was called Natural Motion, where they made basically tools to help you animate in a more AI way. I don't know if it was AI itself, but it was kind of in that realm. And I'm like, man, can they kind of automate this whole process?
Okay.
And so I was like, I need to learn more about how tools are made and get back in that space. So I ended up asking Andy, I was like, hey, I'm still at Sony. Do you want to just, at this point, he was still living in Chicago. I said, do you want to move to San Diego and kind of work with me and we can just kind of build tools together? I was already building some tools at Sony, but they didn't really want me to do that full time. They wanted me to
Right.
kind of do a lot of other things. So I ended up asking him to come out and see if he wanted to just kind of build tools with me. We didn't have a clear consensus on exactly what tools we both want to do. I had my ideas, he had his ideas. And so at this point, the video game market was becoming very fragmented in terms of which platform was becoming the most predominant platform. So there was 3ds Max, but another one that was very popular was called Maya.
Mhm.
And so we're like, why don't we make tools that basically provide the best of both worlds? So we'll bring over a bunch of tools from Maya to 3ds Max and a bunch of popular tools from 3ds Max to Maya and just develop those as plugins and sell those. So we did one really quick one. We spent probably a month developing it and then just putting it up on our website. We made a website, again, did all this within about a month, and then just put it up on our website, try to see what would happen. The market for plugins is not very lucrative. We didn't really know or care, but I had saved up probably a good 6 months of runway where I could just kind of play around. And I was like, worst case scenario, I'll just go back to Sony. And so,
and you're in San Diego too, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, definitely not too bad for that. And actually, the idea for Andy was to just come here, get kind of his feet wet, just kind of work together, kind of brainstorm together, and then go back to Chicago. Because in San Diego, I actually had a roommate, and so he was one of my good friends too. And it turns into Andy sleeping in the living room under his desk. And thankfully the roommate was super cool with it, but that wasn't like the deal we had.
Right. Not the most sustainable long-term option.
Yeah. So if my roommate had Trump as his last name, he probably would have kicked him out of lockdown. Anyway, I know this is not a political podcast, but he ended up staying a lot longer and he ended up not wanting to leave. He was like, I'm staying, and I'm grateful for that too. But he ended up staying, and we ended up continuing to work on various plugins. The first one, like I said, it was very simple. We just put it out there. And it was really one of those ones that I kind of wanted to have just to help me with my work. But I also got to be very familiar with Maya, and I was wanting to build tools for that too. So we ended up just building a bunch of plugins, or not plugins, but one plugin with a bunch of tools for Maya, and just tried to promote that on various forums and whatnot. And it was doing okay. Like, it wasn't like doing super well, but it did well enough where we can kind of pay our bills. And it was getting attention from big studios. So Pixar, and a lot of these other big studios were like, hey, can we buy a bunch of licenses? And we would get invited to a bunch of studios. Like, I don't know if a lot of these are even around, which is sad because these were like my dream companies to work for, but like Digital Domain, and of course, I'm sure ILM and all of them are still around, but these were all the big studios, and some of them were closer to me in San Diego or LA. So they would invite us to all these places, and we got to meet with the VFX supervisors and get to feel for what tools they needed. And we provided not only our general software, which we provided as a plugin, but we also started to provide like custom software and started to even do custom training. And sometimes I would be flown out to different parts of the country, and demonstrate the software and also demonstrate how to do certain things, or just teaching and stuff like that. Anyway, we ended up continue to kind of go with this, and then we ended up getting some pretty prolific, or I should say lucrative contracts to do custom software, and more or less had to put the plugin on a back burner, which was very different than what was happening early, like where we would get feedback and we just continuously iterate, and people just saw this flurry of new features. And what we also saw was Autodesk approached us, and they're like, hey, we'd like to acquire your software. And we're like, okay. And, we're very willing to sell it. And as a plugin, you're quite frankly very limited. And so we were eager to be acquired because it would open up the opportunity for us to do things the way we actually want to do it. And a lot of the things that we did had to be kind of hackish.
Yeah, much deeper integration.
Exactly, much deeper integration. Their customers are going to be better off. Sometimes you see acquisitions like, oh man, I wish they didn't get acquired. But this one, there's no reason why it wouldn't make sense for everybody.
Yeah.
For them, for us, and certainly for their customers, because it provides a deeper level of integration. And of course, it becomes a free plugin. But
Yeah.
sometimes if you're not in the trenches, again, you're
Yeah.
not doing the work, you don't really know the nuances behind how you need to develop the tools.
Sure.
And sometimes that's the key. Like, and I had about as broad of experience as I could possibly have. At this point, I had pretty much tried and used every 3D application. So I knew not only what 3ds Max and Maya and Softimage and everything in between did, but I knew how all of them did them better than each other. And so I had a lot to kind of go off of. Where if you're a Maya developer, you might have been on a Maya team from the start, and you really don't know what else is out there.
Yep.
You don't know how to do things any better than what Maya might be offering. So that's where our and a lot of times, quite frankly, the plugins from the community where you saw the best innovation, because again, they're doing the work. And so the artists that had the technical skill to develop the tools were the ones that were creating the most innovative stuff.
Yeah, like
But
you
anyway.
said, you're making it for yourself. You know,
Yeah,
you
that
had,
was
you had
another
this big
aspect to it.
motivation to make
Exactly.
it as good as it could be.
Yeah, and after working at Sony and every company before that, like I grew tired of the tools. Like I just didn't like using them every day. And I'm like, man, I want to make better tools. If I was to go back to production, I want to be in a position where I actually can enjoy the actual work before, because right now it just felt like everything was not as fun. And Andrew and I both had this idea of Nira even before we even started with Autodesk. Like, so, and just to give you a premise of what Nira, what we wanted to do with Nira, like with all data, whether it's, you know, simple data or big, large data, we wanted to provide a viewer that is very powerful to be able to access these large data files. So in every market, across every industry you can imagine, there inevitably will be big files. So when I was working at Parsons, I'm dealing with large AutoCAD data or MicroStation. And of course, as I worked in video game development, there's massive characters and props and environments. And it was always just a slog to get access to it and also just even find it. So the goal with Nira is like, hey, how can we build a platform, or how do we build a tool that lets me organize all the things that I've already created and also have access to them? And we also wanted it to be extremely accessible. So we wanted to be web-based. We also had, in part of our contract work, had an opportunity to work with a chair company that was based here in Los Angeles. And they wanted to make a configurator. This is around 2009. So before Autodesk. And they wanted for the configurator. They didn't really care if it was 3D or not. They were okay with it even being 2D. But if you do all the permutations and all the variants with the chair models and the controls and the fabrics and everything else, it literally ends up being millions of different variations on all the different offerings they have. And again, they were fine with you just picking it and then just getting a static 2D render. But I came from a 3D world. So I'm like, you know what, we're doing this in 3D. But I wasn't really paying attention to 3D on the web. And at that time, there was no WebGL. There was something from Google called O3D. It was a plugin for Chrome. I think it was exclusive to Chrome. And it was again, a plugin that allowed you to do 3D. And at the time, I was naive enough to think that Google would just continue to support something indefinitely. I'm sure we've all experienced.
We've all been there.
Yeah. There's something that Google, and they make great innovative stuff, but they oftentimes just put it in a graveyard. I think there's even a website of like the Google graveyard of technologies that they developed. So the O3D plugin ended up, in this one, I'll give them all the credit. They should have not continued on with it, even though the plugin is very robust. WebGL ended up taking over as a standard, but before the WebGL standard, there was O3D, and it was, again, good enough. And I convinced the chair company to adopt it. And I was like, it's open source. Worst case scenario, we'll just take it over. You know what I mean? And we'll just continue to add development to it. And again, a little bit of just over ambitiousness and also just naiveness about what the realities were in terms of what we could even do. So we developed a whole chair designer for them, completely in 3D. And in that time also, like they would give us the CAD data, and I didn't really understand every chair. So they would sometimes ship me the chair, but that started to become impractical. I had an office with like 30 chairs in it. I was like, this is just getting too much. I can't fit all these chairs. Actually, it wasn't 30, but I'm exaggerating. There was probably like 3 or 4, but
and this is before the days of scanning, it sounds like.
So they would give me, actually, some portions were scanned, but the actual chair themselves were CAD data. The things that were scanned were the fabrics. So they gave me a stack. I want to say like 500 fabric pieces. I still have YouTube videos on how to create texture maps from these fabrics. I should make those public. I ended up making them for other people to do the work for us. But the goal was to scan the fabrics, take the CAD data, simplify it, and then basically make them more web friendly. And the CAD data was, as typical, very messy, very laborious to clean up. And oftentimes I didn't understand how everything works, especially if I didn't have access to the chair. So I
Right.
would have to continuously get feedback, and that was not easy to do because it's big data. Like these
Yeah.
are hundreds of megabytes models, sometimes gigabyte size models once they've been tessellated into like triangles. And then I'm like, man, I wish there was a way I can just share this super big model with the, the chair designers or the companies that are developing, or the people involved with the actual chair design. And it was always a time where I'm like, does this work like this? And in order for me to understand that, I have to simplify it and then, do all these other basic things to kind of make it accessible. If you don't simplify it in a way that's clean, then you end up losing parts, and then it just doesn't become as easy. So again, in the back of my mind, while we work on this chair, I was like, man, it would be nice to have a web viewer that can just view large data. Like I have 3ds Max that can load these assets really large. Like I don't want to use TeamViewer or some kind of remote desktop to do all this. I just want to show it, upload it, and then just let them kind of make sure or validate that things are working the way they need to be without having to go through the process of simplifying, because the simplification was almost the last step. Everything else came before it. So that was kind of the back of my mind. And also, while we were developing it, even with the O3D plugin, like he would share it, and it's like, oh, he's using Internet Explorer, or they're using Firefox, or they're using something not compatible with the viewer. And so it became kind of a compatibility nightmare. And then, of course, WebGL came about, and we realized that okay, that's the new standard. We can't leave this company high and dry. So we basically rewrote the whole thing and made it compatible for WebGL. We did it for free, completely, just to kind of make sure that they weren't kind of stuck.
Yeah.
But there was still challenges with that. WebGL, even though it was a standard, it still wasn't being widely adopted. Like Microsoft was hesitant to adopt it. Apple is continuously still slow to adopt it. I shouldn't say adopt it, but adopt the latest in all the later iterations. But even with that, go ahead.
And for some of our listeners that aren't that familiar with WebGL, can you just describe that real quick, what that is?
Sure. WebGL is a technology that's built into more or less all modern browsers now that allows for visualization of 3D data native to the browser. So you can basically use the core technology. There are libraries built on top of WebGL that makes building tools a little bit more easy. And so it's very mature, but it is a little bit fragmented still. So there are variations of WebGL, like WebGL 1.0, WebGL 2.0, and some of the browsers, I would say like Chrome and maybe Apple, or I say Google and Apple are probably the two biggest browser companies now. More or less everyone adopts their two backends, have different levels of support. I don't really monitor WebGL as much anymore because Nira doesn't use WebGL at all. And part of the reason for that is because we just realized WebGL is just not fun. You're not going to be getting the full performance of your machine because it's running through a browser, and it's just you don't have access to a lot of the more sophisticated technologies that GPUs offer through WebGL. And even when you do, it's always several stages behind what you can do with like Vulkan or OpenGL and other technologies that are more desktop native. So these are technologies that you can run on your desktop. These are the technologies that you use when you're trying to make a state-of-the-art video game. And WebGL, it can do amazing graphics, really compelling stuff, but it's never going to be, or it has never reached the same level of feature listings that you might get with the other refer to as APIs, like again OpenGL, Direct3D, and all these other ones.
So cool, because as you're explaining this, I feel like I'm reliving my life on the user end of this, because I've been that all my life. And so WebGL probably solved the problem of, okay, I can view these 3D models without needing to install something, which is the first stop. But if it sounds right, what you're saying is there was still that problem of it doesn't really have good performance. I can't actually look at very complicated things.
Right, the spinning wheel of death on your computer, because it's just and that in itself caused problems as in the business sense, where you're trying to share deliverables with somebody and you're like, oh, I could share it over the web, and all of a sudden you got customers that are pissed off because their machines can't handle it, and they're just like bogged down, and it just creates this whole project management issue of how do you share this data.
That's a great point. And so even if WebGL did offer all the same things that you get with the other APIs, include like Vulkan and OpenGL or Direct3D, there's still the challenge of it, when you're sharing something, is the person or that has access to it, or the client machine, so to speak, will it be capable of visualizing that data? Because you still need a machine that has support for that kind of data. And if it's a simple model, fine, WebGL is perfect. And there are plenty of platforms that utilize, I would say 99% of platforms utilize WebGL, and some of them are perfectly suited for that. Like if you're on Sketchfab or something like that,
Yep.
I think it was a right choice for them to do it, because WebGL, one of the other benefits to it is all the main compute on WebGL is being done on the device itself, whether it's your
Right.
laptop or your phone or whatever the case may be. So it's very lightweight for their servers to host that data, because they're just sending the data. And the big drawback is it's not unusual for you to go even on websites like Sketchfab and then try to get access to a more sophisticated model, and then it's just not working. Whether you're on a laptop or a Chromebook or a mobile phone, it just eventually will hit it'll either crash or will stop working. And
because your machine doesn't have the specs to handle that.
Yeah,
the rendering
exactly. Or just the browser is just not up to snuff for it. Even sometimes I've had circumstances where even and I have a fairly high-end machine with the latest generation GPUs, and even there I have issues. And I have a 1 gigabit internet connection, which is another challenge with WebGL. You have to download all the data. And then the other major significant issue with WebGL, and this was extremely relevant to us when we were focused on the media and entertainment space, is security. If you're viewing anything with a WebGL viewer, that data cannot be secure. Like it can be taken off and stolen and used in any capacity anyone decides they want to do. So if anyone ever shares an asset to you and it's being shared in a WebGL viewer, it's trivial for someone that has the know-how to take that data and keep it for forever.
There's the Blender plugins of like yank them up, just like how there's YouTube rippers out there. I know there's like WebGL rippers, and over the first day I've done it, right? You can like pull from Google Earth and that kind of stuff to yank what maybe you shouldn't be able to yank from a server.
Exactly. And a lot of these platforms, they mention it like, oh, we protect it, or we do certain things, or we obfuscate the data in a way that's not compatible. Of course, they're not going to share, OBJ files or standard file types. Of course, they're going to convert it to something else, but it's still extremely trivial to extract that data in a way that's compatible with more or less any 3D application. And again, we were in the early stages of Nira, coming from the media and entertainment space. We were focused on making sure that we not only provided a viewer that can showcase large data and also make it very accessible, we also wanted to make it very secure. And so the question is, how do we do that? And the answer to that was, let's use or create a desktop viewer that's as powerful as possible, utilizing the latest technologies of whatever API we end up wanting to use, and basically push it to the hardware limits or whatever hardware limits we end up utilizing for the actual device itself, and then stream that to the client as a video. So there was technologies out there that was already doing this. There was a company called, I think OnLive, I think they were called. So they were one of the first cloud-based gaming services, where instead of buying a PlayStation 5 or a high-end desktop machine for playing your video games, you buy what sometimes referred to as a zero client, very simple machine that's almost like a what do they call them? Like a Google Chrome.
Like
Is it Chromecast? Chromecast device.
Like a Fire TV stick.
A Fire TV, exactly. Like a Roku or something like that. So very simple devices. More or less, they're good at playing back video, and then you can connect a controller to it, mostly wirelessly, and then their servers would run the game for you, and they're typically like PC games, and then you would just stream it. And the benefit to this is, you could jump into a game instantly because they would have the games kind of pre-running. So the load times were instant, and you would get reasonably good graphics with minimal latency on a tiny little box that was like a little bit bigger than like a phone, and it would just connect to your desktop, or I'm sorry, connect to your television. And we're like, all right, they seem to have figured out, let's do the same thing. Of course, we still wanted it to be on the web, and so we were trying to figure out what technologies were on the web that allowed for low latency video streaming. And unfortunately, around 2010, 11 or so, there was still nothing available. So we were like, well, do we have to develop a plugin? Plugins for browsers is not a thing anymore, but at that time there was still the idea of developing plugins. We're like, we'll develop a plugin, but that again eliminated the accessibility, or made the accessibility a little bit more challenging. So we were trying to wait for newer technologies. And around that same time, something called WebRTC was becoming available. And this is probably what we're using now for our call. So WebRTC is a very standard technology now for video conferencing and stuff like that, and it's made specifically for browsers. And one of the best benefits of WebRTC is that it actually has access to your media encoders and decoders typically on your GPU. So it can provide really fast interactive video decoding and encoding right on your GPU, specifically decoding. That's the part we need. And also at the same time, NVIDIA started to make their GPUs available with video encoders in real-time hardware. And so, we can take the graphics, encode it into a video, and then use WebRTC to stream it to the browser. And so, after we ended our partnership with Autodesk, we tried to develop a prototype of just that.
Yeah.
And we were successful. We're like, oh my God, this is actually working. I think I even made a video of the very first stages. It was just some terrible 3D model that we had just basically streaming into a web browser. And now we had access to basically web graphics using desktop technologies now available through the web.
Awesome.
That's cool.
Wow.
And thanks to it's so cool to hear, like, you have the idea and then these other different technologies just kind of happen to come together at the right time to make it possible. Because without that piece, you could have thought of Nira in 1995, but without those pieces being there,
that's exactly right. At the end of the day, we wanted the experience to feel like it was native to the device. You might be connected to our servers, and again, it's referred to as remote or server-side rendering, or remote server rendering, or sometimes pixel streaming. And the closer you are to the servers, the better, because it minimizes the amount of time your mouse clicks are sent to our server and back. And what we realize is that with WebRTC and with all the technologies that are made available through NVIDIA, we were able to get what felt like a desktop application through a web browser. We didn't want it to feel like what you typically get with like TeamViewer and some remote desktop applications. And we wanted to feel like it was more native. And we were actually pleasantly surprised. We're like, wow, this actually works better than we thought. And so at this point, I know I'm kind of rambling, so if you have any questions, let me know too.
No, this is great.
Okay, good.
I have a leading question, but
sure. Sure, I should go ahead.
Yeah, so no, this is all great. So you've got this perfect viewer now for 3D stuff, but I think what's so interesting is I'd love for you to explain how I think you're going for this next, like how this goes from viewing the media stuff over to like, how do you start to get this to be like the inspection architecture tool that it is now? That's where I came in to find it. And I went on your website, and as I use Nira all the time, by the way, I love it. And I noticed I could tell your roots are in 3D media.
Right.
And that was interesting because I'm like, okay, I do that stuff and I love that stuff, but as an architect or an engineer, this is where I'm finding real value out of it from this inspection side. So how'd that come about? How did we pivot that?
Good question. That's all Mike's fault. No, just kidding.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, you got it. No problem.
In all honesty, it's actually a lot of individuals like Mike that brought us here. But I'll be the first to mention that it's even though I did have that background in construction and engineering with Parsons and in photogrammetry and stuff like that, and actually in the very early stages of Nira, just through kind of like a mutual friend, we had someone that wanted us to do stuff in the AEC world. And so in the very, very early stages of Nira, that was our main focus. So he specifically wanted to be able to, it was actually a steel fabrication company. They were based out of Canada. And again, it was through kind of like a mutual contact. We kind of mentioned it. I mentioned it actually to my cousin. I was like, hey, we're doing this viewer. And he's like, oh, I think I have a perfect person that would want this. And so he connected me with someone else. And then we started developing it for them. And then they wanted support for IFC. At that point, I never even heard of what IFC was. And I'm just like, okay. And we started developing it and like, man, this is not our forte. Like, we don't really know what we're doing here. And we have difficulty innovating in this space. Let's stick to what we know. And so our strategy was, let's go back to media and entertainment and focus on building like a review platform. So if you're developing a character for a video game or whatever the case may be, you upload it to Nira, you can annotate it, you can find defects in it. We'll build all kinds of analytics tools to kind of help you find issues and then iterate with the design of whatever you're trying to develop. And again, go ahead.
very much focused on that collaborative piece, because
Yes.
you might have a studio who's got
Right.
people dispersed all
Right.
over the place. You
Right.
need this like real-time, quick
Absolutely.
collaboration.
And at the time I left Sony, it started to become clear as day. Like studios were all throughout the world. Like people, we had people leaving San Diego to move to Singapore and every other place around the world. And so it was a circumstance where remote work was just a thing. In fact, that's kind of the last thing that ended up happening with me. Was I was starting to manage remote employees. And I'm like, man, this is, they're in Ukraine and everywhere and throughout the world. And I'm like, it's starting to get spread out. We need tools to help make that process easier. And when you're dealing with 2 gigabyte 3D models, which wasn't completely unusual, like there are times like, man, I have to review this. It's going to take me 20 minutes just to load this.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? I don't even want to look at it. Like, it's just like, I'm just going to take the screenshots as my review. And the screenshots don't do it justice, because if you're an artist, you're going to always present your best screenshots. And you're not going to give the full picture. So if a character with a backpack on it, you're not going to see the backpack and you might decide that's not going to fit the style of the game or whatever the case may be. So again, we went back to games. Part of it is because it was more my forte. I also had a lot of connections in that space. And so I started to meet up with a lot of either friends or companies that I thought might be interested. So I flew out to meet with Nintendo and of course Sony, Netflix and Pixar and all these companies, and just basically started to showcase what we're doing. And we started to get some traction. And like the challenge with them is that they all have their own, what we do is sophisticated, but video games and entertainment space, they do some of the most amazing stuff ever. Like I'm always so impressed. I sometimes watch a Pixar movie and just start to cry just from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's so incredible. And they all have their own unique needs. And what seemed to be clear was that they wanted to have the look of Nira match as closely to the look of their particular render as much as possible. And that's a very difficult problem to solve. We said, okay, well, maybe we don't focus as much on the last stages of the design and more focus on the early stages of the design. And some studios started to buy into that and like, okay, we can do that, because the idea of us trying to have an API where they can bring in their own shaders and everything else like that was it was a significant amount of work. And at the same time, there were some new standards coming out that were trying to make that a little bit more standardized, so to speak. So it's not something that you probably hear in the AEC world, but there's something called Material X that's becoming very popular that can standardize the look of 3D objects. And it was
like in SketchUp or something where you're
trying exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So the idea was, okay, just like we needed to wait for WebRTC and encoding technologies, I think we need to wait for Material X to mature and some other technologies like USD and some of these other new technologies that we were hearing about before almost anyone else, because we were in touch with the studios that were actually developing it, like Pixar and some of these other ones, and we said, okay, let's come back to this. But at the same time, we had started developing a product and we wanted to make it useful to some of them. And so we pitched Nira as an early stage design tool. So this is the tool you use to find issues with your mesh and textures and UVs and stuff like that. And we started to get some adoption. This is pre-COVID. And so we would visit these studios. I actually remember we visited Netflix here in Los Angeles, and it was a huge room. There's about 20 people attending, and they literally brought a hard drive and like, let's test this out right now. And they gave us like a 4 gigabyte asset from one of their shows, and let's see if this works. And we loaded it, and sure enough, it worked. Actually, I'm still blown away that it did. And they ended up becoming one of our earliest customers.
Cool.
And yeah, that was a nice achievement. And also that was our goal, was to try to get this to be used in that, again, early design stage. What ended up happening was COVID. Once COVID hit, all the studios more or less shut down, and we're not taking meetings, and it was just a lot harder to kind of get them. And we're still kind of in stealth mode, so nobody knew about us. We didn't have like a website where you can learn about Nira. It was just more or less me just reaching out to my contacts and seeing what I could do there, and trying to get as much feedback as we can with Nira. And so when COVID hit, we had to kind of reassess, and we're like, all right, let's just put this out there. Let's just let people know about it and see what happens. And we started to see, okay, who's doing stuff with big data? And we often saw people doing things with photogrammetry models, and they were getting into the hundreds of millions of triangles. And Nira was already set to load up to several billions of triangles, and we demonstrated that already. And we're like, okay, let's see where this takes us. At the back of my mind, I'm like, but there's already technologies that are what I actually assumed were just better. those are utilizing something called tile-based rendering.
Yeah.
And so they still utilize WebGL, so you don't get a lot of the security benefits of it. But the tile-based renderings at least alleviates some of the technical challenges of viewing large data sets.
And those are used heavily in like GIS platforms, right? Like you'll have
yes,
tiled rasters and all
exactly.
kinds of data.
So the way they work is that you might have a super detailed 3D model. Could be several hundreds of millions of triangles, and they end up creating levels of detail into chunks. And so basically, you don't get the full model when you first load the data. You get the model over some time, or as you start to navigate towards the model, and then you zoom into an area, then it starts to pop in the higher resolution detail. Again, this is not unusual. This is what games do too. But at the same time, like a lot of customers are telling us they didn't want this, and I'm like, well, why not? It seems to work quite well. And they said when they presented their models, it looks muddy, it looks ugly, and if you have a slower internet connection, it can sometimes take several minutes to load the full detailed model, even for a small portion of it. And so again, we kind of pushed back on it because we felt like that problem was solved with these tile-based approaches. But again, we kept saying this is not something we're focusing on. But sure enough, when we made Nira available for just on your own, because we had a way you can just start a trial and start your own subscription, all of our customers were coming in from like the AEC space. Like I would say 99% of our customers were coming from that space.
Wow.
And we're like, okay, so at this point it was just me reaching out to them like, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we want a tool that lets us showcase our high resolution 3D models. Some of them were already using cloud platforms for processing the data. So they might be using, some of these other platforms that can create these very high resolution models, and then just downloading those models and then uploading to Nira. And they would say, well, these other platforms use these tile-based viewers, and I have difficulty sharing them because whoever gets access to it doesn't have a fast enough internet connection or a machine that's capable of it, or it just doesn't work. And to this day, there are still some machines that just can't do 3D at all. Like if you go to, like, for example, a bank, or if you go to sometimes a conference in a hotel room, like they'll be connected to like a zero client and they just don't have any 3D graphics at all. And so they just don't work. And so they want to make sure that they have a platform that they can send a URL to and just be assured that whatever the size of the data, whether it's 1 megabyte or 1 terabyte, it's going to be able to load, and it's going to be consistent across all platforms, whether it's a 10-year-old iPhone or a $20,000 workstation. And so that was where it was coming. And of course, they just didn't want the viewer. They wanted tools beyond just a basic 3D viewer. And that's where we are today. It's just basically getting that continuous feedback in terms of what tools they want. We started to understand the tools that they were already using, which complements Nira. So these are desktop tools for creating photogrammetry models. And they basically wanted the ability to not only visualize the high resolution 3D models, but be able to augment that data with the photos, the orthomosaics, the design lines, overlays, the line work, and the quest for supplementing the 3D models with everything else is an ongoing process. Yeah. So now we're 100% focused on satisfying those customers. So whereas before we were kind of split, it's like, all right, we got some customers. We've more or less told those customers in the entertainment space, it's like, hey, we're going to be focusing on this market. Nira already does a lot for what they need. And we're not going to be prioritizing, improving, the shader system or the integrations with some of their other tools. We're focusing on the AEC markets exclusively, and those that are doing stuff in the GIS space.
Well, I'm just going to throw out a stat, and this probably will make sense to a lot of people why this is happening. The market size for construction in the U.S. alone in 2024, 2.2 trillion.
Yeah,
that's a lot of work happening, and like everybody knows. So I come from the construction background, and I just have so much to say. I mean, first, maybe let me back up even more. Arash, like, you are a gifted storyteller, and that, like, hearing just the progression of how you started from these humble beginnings of that free computer that you got as an 8-year-old, like, highly entertaining. Like, I feel like Scott and I were just in our lounge chairs here, really just enjoying the process of how you got from where you are to where you are today. So that was
Totally.
amazing. Thank you for like sharing that journey to how you got there, especially this last part of this, how things started to transition and open up into the AEC space. Because for a lot of people that are listening and tuning in, we tend to focus on that, but we don't purely focus on that. And I'm sure there's a lot of shared interest in like the entirety of that story. So that was really amazing to hear. But as a construction person, I was always on this quest for the silver bullet of technology that would solve the problems that I saw on the day-to-day on construction sites. And there are many, like, talking about chaos, like sometimes I like to think of a construction project as this orchestrated chaos, because you're relying on so many things to happen in unison or in this pre-planned way. And it's really challenging to manage a project that has so many moving parts, and counting on that person is going to hold that commitment. And, when one person doesn't hold that reliable commitment, the whole, the train, like the string just buckles and lots of things start to happen. So it's a fascinating industry that is obviously a critical component to the GDP and the growth. And, just kind of going back to this, finding the silver bullet. And this is how I came across Nira, because I was going through this journey of, well, I have these high expectations as somebody who's been in the construction industry for 26 years. And I know that some of the tools used in the industry are extremely mature and advanced tools, but this 3D rendering piece and visualization piece had always been a bit of a struggle. And it comes from all different angles, where we've had clients where you sit down at a table with your architecture team and you're looking at plans in 2D. You're on Bluebeam. Like, Bluebeam is an amazing tool, and I know they have 3D plugins for Bluebeam as well. But you have clients nodding their head and they're like, yeah, looks great. But then when things start to get built, they're like, wait a minute, that's not really what I was thinking it was. So you have this, as being a construction person, you have this, I guess, maybe an incorrect assumption that everybody is as spatially practiced as you are. And they're not. Like, I think that is a gross assumption to make. And the world of 3D in construction really has been game changing, from BIM and the modeling to now this reality capture piece, and bringing all these as-built components together. So in my quest, I was, Arash, you said it, it's like, there's people that are coming from, from other applications. And that's exactly the path that I took. I was like, well, this is good, but it's not really good enough. Or if I try to share this with a client, they're going to get the spinning wheel of death. They're not going to get a good experience. And that's going to cause headaches for me. And I want to, sell my services and, the value that I bring as a construction person to like help these people get there. And when I came across Nira, I was like, holy cow, this is exactly what I was looking for this presentation piece. And then to see how it has started to align with what you were just talking about, how you've pivoted to, to cater more towards the industry, and the tools that are coming along with that are really, for me, it's been a really fun journey to collaborate and be able to have these opportunities to talk to you over the last year plus of like how some of these things, or it might have been 2 years at this point, where it's like, hey, these are some of the issues that I'm encountering. We have a little conversation, and things that you've been working on. So I guess I just want to say that from my perspective, I think you guys are on the right track, and I think you've already realized that. And it's just exciting for me as somebody who's been in the industry for such a long time to have a tool that does provide all these benefits.
Well, Thank you. I have to say, I know I was a little bit facetious earlier, but really a lot of where we are today is because of individuals like you and Scott and providing all that feedback. We certainly didn't have, like I said, the pedigree to know exactly what to be doing, but we've had many, many conversations, especially early on. I've had, sometimes daily conversations with individuals, and I'm super, super grateful for every individual that's helped us get here. I
Yeah.
can look back at like Nira and say our legacy comes from the entertainment space and the gaming space, but and that could be considered a drawback, and sometimes I consider that a huge advantage, because the one thing you do in games is you try to optimize everything so that you can give the gamer, in our circumstance, the user, the best experience possible. And so much of what we do, it derives from that. It's at the end of the day with construction, visualization isn't always the priority. It sometimes is, but for us, it's almost always like the highest priority. We want people to be able to visualize their data in a way that looks the absolute best. And we can take advantage of the latest and greatest in hardware, because of course we're rendering things on servers that have later generation GPUs, and we're still on our quest to continue adding all these supplemental tools to provide more than just the viewer. But the focus for now is to continue advancing the viewer so that you can at least see the data in the best way possible. And considering how much some of the hardware costs, whether it's drones or laser scanners, I'm blown away by how much I thought drones were expensive. Like these laser scanners,
Oh my gosh,
just more or less any terrestrial laser scanner is like close to $100,000. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So these are not cheap toys.
No.
They're very expensive, and we want to make sure that if you're sharing it, you can do it in a reliable way that it doesn't add more stress to your life, and also provides it in a visual way. We love it when our customers like telling us, I share this asset, and our clients were wowed. And it's Nira's just a part of that puzzle.
Yeah, that happens regularly when I'm presenting and I'm sitting in an office full of surveyors or engineers, and I pull up a web-based model and just spin it, or a point cloud and spin it around, and there's no latency, and they're all just like, what is that? What do you like? Wow. Like that's I mean, as a project manager, that is not, I mean, it's very significant to be able to interact and collaborate in something that is reliable and it works and it's fast, because I think we've become so spoiled, where those of us that remember the days of dial-up, it's like, oh my God, I actually lived in Atlanta for a while, and we had broadband, and then we moved to the mountains in Colorado, and they didn't have broadband yet. So we had to go backwards to dial up. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this is painful. So people, they can't even wait a microsecond, it seems like, anymore. And there's frustration because we've become so spoiled with how these things work. So those little microseconds make a difference in people's workflow. And
we think
important.
about that often.
Yeah.
And we still have areas to improve, but even with where we're at today, and I'm lucky where I'm able to get a gigabit internet connection, we're now dealing with data that's so much bigger than anything I ever dealt with in the past. Like we have customers that are uploading a single data set that's 10 terabytes. When you're doing laser scans, it's just you press a button, you wait a couple minutes, you press a button, you wait a couple minutes. Each time it's one gigabyte, sometimes more. And if you're capturing an oil and gas refinery, it's not unusual to capture 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 scans. And now they have a way where they can load that within a few seconds on their phone. If you had a 1 gigabit connection or a fiber connection, imagine having to download 10 terabytes. We actually found a data set. I think it was Tokyo. Someone had scanned a portion of Tokyo as a laser scan data. They're like, oh, this would be cool. Let's just download this and put this on Nira. And it was, and by the way, if we have any customers, please don't do that unless you actually want to do that. But we found the data set, and then before we knew it, we didn't even realize how big it was. It was 15 terabytes. Like, all right, never mind. We're not going to bother. Yeah. So the data can be quite large, but we're the work we did for the point cloud viewer was in particular, a long road, but we're grateful that we were able to do it. But again, it wouldn't have been possible. And I obviously I'm kind of the person that speaks on behalf of Nira, but we have a really talented team, and I've only really mentioned Andy so far, but one of our other founders, Dario, he is one of the key developers for a lot of the amazing features that you see in Nira.
Awesome. Yeah. I had just one other question for you, because hearing this whole thing it almost seems like a recurring theme I'm finding from the very beginning of when you were doing your own tools to now is you really embody like know thy customer, right? Like whether you were working for yourself or you're making these tools, you really have your finger on the pulse of what people actually want here. And I feel like that really shows through on Nira. There's so many things about it. Again, same thing coming from like, I came in pretty blind to it and just stumbled upon it myself. Like everything from, you can just buy it, right? I don't, no one wants to talk to like sales for like 2 hours and go back and forth just to get a price tag, and you just go use it. And then even that, to the point of what you don't have, like you don't have all these superfluous features and all these stacked things that are like just there to like stuff the feature list. Every single tool in there is like a tool that I'm using. So like my question is like, how do you prioritize that? How do you figure that out? Because it seems like your priorities are very correct from my side. Like what you've chosen to focus on is what people want. And there's things you could do, but you've clearly made the choice of saying that's maybe later, maybe never, but this other thing is what people want that no one else has. Like the inspection tools is what I'm thinking of, for example.
Thank you for all that. So yeah, I mean, we always have to be very selective with the size of the team that we have. We have to be very selective about what we work on. There is feedback coming from a big swath of our customers, and we try to prioritize what we get the most feedback on, but we also try to prioritize on things that we think we can improve upon in Nira or offer. And it's not always easy. That's probably the most challenging aspect to Nira, is knowing what specifically to work on. And that's probably the thing that gives me the most stress, because I'm like, man, should we be working on this? And of course, when things take longer than we expect, that inevitably means that A, that feature is not coming out, but B, feature number 2 is not available. And there's customers that are waiting on that. And I am the worst with being overly optimistic about how long things should take. And I do have some of a technical background, but I'm not doing the coding as on the product anymore. So it's one of those things where I'm relying on our developers. And we're often trying to push the envelope with everything that we're doing. And we probably could have released our point cloud viewer a year ago. And it was just released a few months ago, but we always try to say, oh man, there's another optimization we could do here. There's another thing we could do here. And that will eliminate the popping that you get here. And this will improve this. And it's just one of those things where we're like, all right, well, again, because of the size of our team, we don't have a lot of opportunities to kind of put something out there. And we want to make sure that we do the best that we can with everything that we do. And sometimes to our own fault, whether or not we should be putting that much effort into it or not. But yeah, in terms of general features, I think that a lot of this stems from, again, individuals like you and Mike and those that are giving us that feedback. It's if it's something that we can understand, then we do it right away. But a lot of times we let it kind of simmer for a bit. Like, okay, we have this idea. I know, Scott, in particular, we had a meeting, I think about a year ago, and you gave me great feedback. That's been sitting in my mind for a year. And it's not unusual for me to be in the shower or going to bed and me thinking about that problem and thinking about how best to solve that problem. Because you're right. If you implement something and you don't do it the right way, you either have to redo it, which can kind of break things, or you have to kind of stack things on top of each other, and then it starts to build on bloat. And again, we want to keep our code as tidy as possible so that we don't make things so difficult that A, it would be difficult to start hiring people, and B, it just becomes unyieldly for us.
Well, I think I see that a lot in the industry, where people are racing to add features and they're not focused on the core experience of the viewer, or like how it just operates, like the user experience. I think when you're a mile wide and an inch deep with features, then there's something that's lost there in the experience. And I think that's something that it seems like you guys have really straddled that challenge really well, because the viewing experience and the speed at which it renders and the features that are there now, I think really is a testament to that approach.
Well, thank you.
Definitely. And it shows. Like, I think engineers and architects, I work with a lot of them, like, unfortunately, the laser scanning world especially, and not knocking anyone in particular, but like there's a lot of being treated like a guinea pig, I think, with new technology in the AEC world. A lot. There's a lot of software I always get every day that's built as this ultimate one push button thing. And you try it and you're like, marketing didn't really talk to product. Like, some disconnect happened there. And Nira is like the opposite of that. Like, you're the antithesis to that. Like, when you're saying you want it to simmer, it's like, yes, that's, I think, what we all want as engineers and architecture users, construction professionals. Like, we want the people who make these tools to simmer on it, because we don't want to like give a piece of advice or feedback and you say it's a great idea and you do a real quick 5-minute code and you slap it on the website and it's broken a million ways, but you check that box and you're like, great, we have the feature, who cares? I think too many companies operate that way. I have given feedback to companies who implement it, and it's awful. Like the implementation, I almost wish I didn't give the feedback because the implementation was so poorly done that clearly, like, it went through the game of telephone, it got done, and then it came back, and it's like, it kind of rather you actually didn't even listen to me in the first place. And just everything in Nira is like the total opposite. It's like when you do it, you're clearly doing it, and it is. I think all of the users, myself certainly, like absolutely see that. So like keep doing it that way, because that really, really matters.
Yeah, I'm going to zoom us back out because I know that there's a couple topics specifically that we wanted to get your perspective on, and that is, the innovation in the space is rapidly advancing. So, there's photogrammetry, there's laser scanners, there's point clouds, there's Gaussian splatting, there's NERFs. Like I think Gaussian splatting is kind of taking over the NERF space, but these are all techniques for capturing and displaying 3D information. So there's been a lot of effort on the point cloud side of things, and Scott and I both work heavily in point clouds, and we see that there's so much value in point clouds because you have millions of points of data that you can pull information, you can interpret, you can analyze. So the viewer for the point cloud viewer is phenomenal. But just like when you guys are looking forward at some of these other ways, because I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are, like where is the future headed if you have this crystal ball, and like do you see one of these really being in the spotlight for a while, or is there like a lifespan as technology advances where the next big thing I think is going to make point clouds, they're not going to be the thing anymore, like they're going to be obsolete, or maybe not I don't know. It's just sometimes I wonder, as investing in, like we said, some of this equipment is $100,000 for a good tripod, terrestrial scanner. It's like, wow, what if Gaussian splats are, a year out, they're going to be just as accurate and efficient at a fraction of the cost. So it's kind of unnerving from our side, or anyone's side for that matter, that's investing heavily in equipment, that you see the pace of technology. Like, is there a thread that you're seeing that, one, is exciting to you, and two, like kind of informing where you're headed at Nira?
Well, for sure, the pace of development that we're seeing in 3D is staggering. Like, it's just remarkable how much that's happening. And we've seen a few technologies kind of come and go. We've seen a few fads kind of come and go. Thankfully, we were small enough not to even be able to entertain some of these things, and we probably wouldn't have anyway. Like, the whole NFT era that came and gone, and I'm glad we didn't touch any of that stuff. But even some shinier technologies like NERF and some of that rendering stuff, we had to ask ourselves, as I'm sure you guys remember, it wasn't even that long ago, just about 4 or 5 years ago, when NERF technology was becoming available. It's like, whoa, this looks revolutionary. This is going to change everything. Yeah. But we asked ourselves, okay, what problem is this really solving? What are you able to actually do with the technology? And it's not super obvious. You sometimes have to, play with it. Watching a few videos or whatnot, not going to be enough, and understand the technology, and then ideally understand it well enough to see where or what the potential is, or how far will we be able to get with it in some reasonable amount of time that will actually be worth investigating in the short term. And with NERF, we said, okay, this doesn't look like it's going to be a solvable problem, or the challenges that they still present will not be solved anytime in the near future. And sure enough, it kind of did, but only through a very different approach. And that's with, of course, something that you had mentioned, which is Gaussian splats. Gaussian splats, on the other hand, is it does solve some unique challenges and some unique problems. And I don't think they're going to make point clouds or traditional photogrammetry models obsolete. I think it's just another opportunity to visualize data that maybe wouldn't be represented as well with either point clouds or textured 3D models,
like reflective surfaces.
Yeah.
Like
so Gaussian splats do a great job with shiny reflective surfaces. What else? Thin shapes. What else is there? There is if you wanted to get like a background environment, if you're capturing a building or a cell tower or whatever the case may be. Typically with photogrammetry models, you try to limit the scope of your model just to the subject that you're capturing. The rest of the data usually ends up being pretty ugly. But with Gaussian splats, like you can feel like you're in the context of whatever environment you're in. Now, granted, if you navigate to that area, it starts to look very strange. But if you're in that same space of whatever you're capturing, the context around you looks remarkable. And so with Nira, what we're actually working on adding support for Gaussian splats now. And the idea is to do what we already do with point clouds and mesh data, which is you can just supplement one with another in the same data set. So you might have something that's a partial photogrammetry textured model or point cloud data set mixed in with the Gaussian splat and kind of have the best of both worlds. So that allows for you, for example, to go in with a mobile scanner, and some of these mobile scanners now are able to produce a Gaussian splat and then bring in some CAD elements into that environment and have that flexibility. So I think Gaussian splats, excuse me, is here to stay. There is significant amounts of advancements that are still happening in that space. And we are trying to keep up with it as much as possible. But we've seen enough to know that is definitely something that we should be supporting. And that is something that we should have more to share about in the short term, probably in the next month or so.
Cool.
Great.
My last probably my last somebody could call it technical question, but this all touches on great stuff because when I talk to my clients, it's amazing, even though I'm in a fairly focused industry, like we do facade inspections, but we also do some like general BIM scanning and GIS. You can go to one customer and they think point clouds are worth every dollar and photos are worth nothing. And then you go to another customer and I'm always amazed. We'll give a point cloud to a customer and be like, I don't know. And then you'll show them the one photo of the bolt that they needed to inspect. And they're like, now I'm writing the check. So if it's one thing I've learned and that Nira is doing well here is, you kind of, it's not that you need to support everything, but you need to support a wide enough variety because even among the same company, this point clouds versus photos thing drives me nuts because I'm like, it's everything, right? It's Pano, it's 360, it's point clouds and all that. So is that kind of how you see it as well? Like, is that, it seems like your roadmap is combining these things together. Like the point, it's not just, you're not just a point cloud viewer. You're not just a photo viewer. These should all kind of coexist. Is that kind of how I have it?
Coexist and just offer just the support for all the different variety of data. So right now, I feel like we do a great job with textured mesh data. We could still do better. I think we have room for improvement there. A point cloud is kind of newer. So I feel like we've done a remarkable job on that already. And I'm very satisfied with what we've done there, but there will still be iterations of improvement with that as well. Gaussian splats is another one. We definitely need to improve our support for general CAD data. So if it's something like an IFC file, or even some of the native file types, like from Navisworks or just DWG files, we don't have a very broad support for all of them. But the goal with Nira is to have one platform that can host all of your data, and quite frankly, across all your domains. Like I said, we're exclusively focused on GIS specialists and surveyors and AEC professionals, but eventually we'd like this to be as general purpose as possible so that you can mix the data from even data that you might be getting from the media and entertainment space. So yeah, it's really, the goal is to have a platform for any type of, quite frankly, media. So not just 3D data, but all kinds of media, including panoramic images. And then, of course, we're not touching on this yet now, but eventually start to support the other types of data, like IoT devices and integration of just different types of data that's associated with the asset itself.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just again, future forward for Nira, are there any strategic integrations or partnerships that you could talk about or that may be of interest of, again, looking for, as a construction person who's trying to consolidate as much as possible their software stack, like their tech stack of like, okay, well, yes, this particular tool does something exceptionally well, so we're going to use it. And there's always this quest to try to consolidate that as much as possible so that you don't have 10 different softwares that you're having to use. But it's just part of the business these days. And, I think people accept that and understand it. But I think that's with thought that they would like to consolidate that as much as possible. So is there any thoughts of some of these strategic integrations, if you will, that you have in mind or that you can talk about, or is that just, something that's
we don't have anything super concrete, but we have considered partnering, or we've often talked about partnering with companies that are in the AI space. So as you know, if there's any technology that's out there that's just really just full speed ahead, it's definitely AI.
Yeah.
And again, our team is small enough where we can't keep up with everything that's happening there, or we just don't have the forte to really understand all that's happening. So we'll either hire people that will help us in that space, and we've already talked to a few individuals, or we just partner with some. So some of those partnerships are already Nira customers, and so they use Nira to basically provide a viewing experience, and then we've already worked with them so that they can integrate their technology into Nira in a very seamless way. And they do it in a way that is sometimes transparent to the user, so they don't even know they're using Nira. They're just using their existing platform, and Nira is more or less their viewing service. But the idea there is to understand, first of all, the problem, make sure that they are providing a solution to that problem, and just see what the traction there looks like, and then maybe find an opportunity to partner with either one of our existing partners, which we kind of, they're kind of customers, but we refer to them as partners, or anyone else that might be a leader in that space. So that would be probably the best opportunity, but we haven't done anything in that space yet, or we don't have anything super concrete happening right now.
Yeah. Pretty amazing platform. I think we're going to transition into our last question here. Just
Sure.
Make sure we're being mindful of everyone's time. So we like to end each episode with something that inspired you, whether it's an experience, a book, a movie, or an article, or something that really set a course for you. I mean, you shared a ton about how you got to where you are. Is there something that really inspired you that you want to leave people with?
Personal one, I'm not sure if this would apply to anyone else, but I'm always inspired by my parents. They came to this country with pretty much nothing, and they've owned a variety of different businesses, everything from the restaurant to a flower shop. And my dad is, I think, around 77 years old now, and he still works 6 to 7 days a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he's always an inspiration. There's been plenty of really late nights for us. And, there's been times where I've worked throughout the night and multiple days on end, and I've seen him do it. Valentine's Day and some of these holidays, those flower shops, man, they are not easy businesses. And so whenever there's a circumstance where I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore, I draw inspiration from him. But I mentioned earlier where, from a professional standpoint, like watching some of these movies and some of these games and some of those, they really inspired me. And growing up, I was very inspired by, the programmers that John Carmack, I'm not sure if you guys know some of these guys.
Sure.
Yeah. So John Carmack and then Tim Sweeney. I don't really get starstruck that often, but I actually saw Tim Sweeney at a SIGGRAPH conference, which is a computer graphics conference we have each year. He's probably the only person I ever wanted to take a picture with. And this was a long time ago, but I saw him like, oh my God, it's Tim. Like, so, but it's those are the individuals that have created something. And also, quite frankly, specifically with Tim Sweeney, like I really respect individuals that kind of stand up to big companies like Apple and stuff like that. I respect the effort and the sacrifice that's done there. But yeah, that's kind of the only thing that kind of comes to mind for me.
Well, those are, I think
those are great ones.
Those are great indeed. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. I would highly encourage listeners to check out Nira. I mean, Scott and I are both users and, had a connection with Arash, but it truly is something that deserves a hard look at for your workflow. And, we had many more questions to ask, and I think maybe this is just an excuse to have you back on at some point in the future.
My pleasure. I love it.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. Scott, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think that's it. I loved hearing your story was fantastic, Arash. I loved hearing every bit about then and now. So this was a blast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. My wife tells me I ramble too long, so I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully everyone else does too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks again for your time, and really excited to continue to experience and see the development of Nira, and we'll hope to catch back up with you soon.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate everything you do.
All right. Take care, Rush.
See ya.
Bye now.